Okay, this next short little video comes from a letter I was writing back and forth with a friend. My friend was sharing with me an experience of almost having a car wreck, and then in the moment having to completely surrender, and in a situation where you think there's no way out, the car wreck doesn't happen, and it's like this miracle that the miracle was that the car wreck didn't happen, and just before that surrender of letting go, it looked like the crash was going to be imminent. So this particular part is going to be on grace. This person was talking about how grace is when we surrender, the grace happens for us. That allows God's grace to come in. I just have a slightly different perspective of that. Not completely. I totally agree with her. But I'm just going to share my particular view on grace. So, grace equals surrender. I totally believe that's true, and that's what my friend was talking about, grace and surrender. So, I totally get the grace thing. This is what I was writing to my friend. What you were saying about it. For me, everything is consciousness. I get this verified in my daily work. So, from that perspective, what grace really is, or is for me, is a neutral zone. Let me see if I can explain it. Let's say you have a problem. It doesn't matter what kind of problem. The problem, whether in the physical world or in one's body, is the result of perceptions that have become beliefs, that have become expectations. So basically experience equal perceptions, which equal beliefs, and then finally expectations. So here's a free flow of energy that gets into a loop, then it gets stuck, and then structure happens because of that. What happens is that our perceptions, beliefs, and expectations dictate to the field what is possible or impossible. If one's perceptions about a thing can be let go of completely, or like in the moment surrender everything, then there is no longer limitation and everything is possible. If we want to change our bodies, our lives, everything must be surrendered. And it's really hard to do that. That is an oversimplification, but if I write anymore, I'll probably confuse the subject and myself. The lightning or enlightening happens when we let go of what is causing the darkness. So my friend was mentioning, let's say you're in a dark room. You've heard the analogy where you're using a flashlight. You know, your consciousness is a flashlight, and you are able to look in the room and find certain things. But then all of a sudden there's a flash of lightning outside the window, and it lights up the room for a moment, and you're like, oh, I can see things. But then as soon as the lightning disappears, then you're back in the darkness with your limited flashlight, your limited awareness. So we have flashes of enlightenment that gives us momentary light, seeing the whole picture. So that's what this is talking to. The lightning or enlightening happens when we let go of what is causing the darkness, which in my perception is our own ignorance. So basically we are causing the ignorance. And I also believe that we are causing the lightning to happen too. So our ignorance is the limited perceptions, beliefs, and expectations we've bought into while here on earth. So from my perspective, we are causing the darkness and the lightning. At least that is the way I see it. So this next little picture, sorry it's a little fuzzy. I probably should have drew it out a little bit better, but this little V shape, you can imagine the top part being completely open, and that's like full, all light, completely awake. And then the narrowing, as you get further and further into this little funnel shape, it gets darker and darker. And so at the very top you're fully awake, at the very bottom you're completely asleep. And there's many levels of that. So basically our physical reality is coming down into the darkness, having the experience, and then coming back out into the awareness with an expanded awareness. So light is awareness, dark is ignorance. So imagine that there is so taking this to the next level, imagine that there is a huge switchboard in your body, or related to your consciousness, your physical, mental, emotional. There's a huge switchboard that relates to that. And again, sorry about the drawing, it's a little fuzzy. And this switchboard governs all aspects of your being. Any limited perceptions, aka judgments, turn one of your switches off. So here you can barely see maybe this on and off, on and off, on and off. But just imagine there's a myriad, just a whole bunch of, or a field of switches. And our perceptions, whether they're limiting turns something off in the switchboard, And when we remain non-judgmental and expanded, the switch remains on. And the switch is related to light. So in any particular situation, we have a certain amount of light into a particular situation, or just our general overall being, we're going to have a certain, our level of awareness or consciousness, you can relate that to light. So when you have a limited perception or belief, you turn off one of your lights. And but we have, thank goodness, we have many aspects to that, so there's a lot more light. And I'd also liken that to the DNA. So here we are turning on and off certain switches. When we have ignorance about something, ignorance, in my opinion, being limited perceptions, beliefs, and expectations, when we have that ignorance, that limitation, we turn some light off. That means we turn some aspect of our DNA off. We limit it from being completely whole and healed or working to its utmost ability. So let me get back to this letter here. So this happens in the school system. Basically what I'm saying is, our lights being turned off goes back to the school system, our family system, religion, and much more. Every little limiting thing that we buy into turns one of our lights off. By the age of 6, we have all been dimmed to some degree. So our full light isn't shining anymore. We're all walking around to some degree somewhat dim, unless you luck out with some really conscious parents. And still then, you're going to run into limitation on the TV and everything else. There are many ways to turn the lights back on: meditation, chanting, tapping, energy work, etc. 1,001 footsteps, paths, ways, and they all have one thing in common. All expansion beyond perceived limitation, in other words, turning on a light, all deals with an expansion in awareness, whether it be temporal or temporary or permanent, means you own it. That expansion happens from the inside out, not the other way around. A practice or technique is needed until one takes ownership of themselves, their consciousness. A practice, technique, or God doesn't give you anything unless you can surrender. In other words, surrender your own ignorance. So it's a tricky place to be in. Our ignorance is like a black hole whose pull is so strong light cannot escape it or enter it. Our ignorance, which is the sum total of our misperceptions, aka judgments, perceptions, beliefs, and expectations. Our ignorance is like that black hole sucking all the light out of us. Letting go of ignorance is the key, but it's easier said than done. To use a not so good example, but one off the top of my head, let's say you want to lose weight. In order to do that, the natural, empowered way, you have to surrender. Whether that surrender is letting go of the old picture of yourself, that surrender may be your attachment to sugar, your perception that it is better than salad. In other words, if you have this perception that you love sugar and you can't live without it, that perception is holding you in place. It's limiting you. Or, even taking it to a deeper level, the perception that sugar is bad. Maybe that is holding you back. In other words, maybe your perception of sugar is making you fat. In other words, if you take off the bad label off of sugar and it's neutral, there's no judgment, then maybe sugar wouldn't have a negative effect on you. Just kind of playing with the edge here. So if you take off the label of sugar, maybe that's what's holding you back, which means you have to satisfy. So let me change here. If you believe something, let's say you believe sugar is bad for you. I personally believe, and I've seen in sessions, that if you believe something, you are then bound by the laws of that thing. So in other words, if you believe sugar is bad, then you will have to take on a diet or do something that eliminates that from your diet. Does that make sense? In other words, if you believe sugar is bad and you're doing it, then that alone is going to have a negative effect on you because you're doing something that you're judging as bad to yourself. So if you believe sugar is bad and you get on a diet that gets rid of sugar, you will lose weight. And you'll lose it fast because it's satisfying that belief system that sugar is bad. But just what if everything that God created, everything that's in the universe is good, and that you can have anything and be satisfied and fed by anything? What if that's true? Let me go back one more second. I'm going to show you another picture here. This picture here comes from my Reiki 2 manual I put together a long time ago. And I'm always looking at how the physical world reflects even in the body. So here on the left you can see this breaker box. And what's interesting, you see the wires coming out of the sides of the breaker box. It made me think of the spine, so I cut and pasted these pictures side to side. So basically, these on and off switches can also relate to your spinal cord. So if you have a judgment about something, you may turn off the energy to that particular part of the body. The video before this, I was talking about someone with self-worth and heart issues. It's like the breaker to the heart had been flipped, or it wasn't working properly. So when we have judgments or misperceptions, we're turning these breakers off instead of letting it all on, and then our house, our body, being full of light. Back to the letter, if I haven't thoroughly confused you yet. So if you believe that sugar is bad, that means you have to satisfy that perception that sugar is bad by staying away from it so you can lose the weight. I hope that makes sense. If you believe something, you then have to play by the rules of the belief. If you have no judgment, then maybe you don't have to play by as many rules. Maybe you can eat sugar and still be fine. There are people out there that can eat whatever they want to and they don't seem to gain weight. I think that has a lot less to do with metabolism and more with perception. I think perception governs your metabolism. At any given moment, we hold the key, the switch to turn the light on or the light off. I've come to see all beliefs as poison. For yours, mine, or anyone else's consciousness to be lit, to be full of light, aka enlightened, we must drop any and all perceptions, beliefs, judgments, and expectations. And I mean all of them. In the beginning of the Bible, in Genesis, it says man and woman were kicked out of the garden. Their connection to the divine and God, so in the garden they were connected to spirituality, and they were in a conscious, constant connection with God. By eating from the tree of knowledge of good and bad, aka taking on judgment, they were kicked out of the garden. They were unable to be in constant communication with Spirit and with God. In order to get back to that constant spiritual state, we must surrender all judgment. So, in my perception, if eating from the tree of what's good and what's bad, judgment, is what kicked us out of the garden, then to get back in it makes sense to drop our judgment. If, let me get back here. So, because to me, okay, if we need to drop this judgment so that we can be in a constant spiritual state, we must surrender all judgments. For we never left the garden. The whole planet is the garden. It was just our newfound judgments, like I'm naked and that is bad, that blinded us, put us in the dark to the fact that we live in and on a beautiful spiritual place, and that we are all the children of God, and as such, we are all entitled to our greatness, not just one or a few. And basically that's it. So what I'm saying here in relating to grace is that I believe we're in charge of that also. Grace is when we can finally drop, or in a particular moment, drop all the expectations, beliefs, and perceptions around something. And then what happens is, if our consciousness is not limiting the field of possibilities, then what happens in that moment of non-judgment, everything expands out, and then so much more is possible. We go from being, from having a limited aspect, a limited possibility, or a limited range of possibilities, to having an infinite field of possibilities able to happen. Because our perceptions, beliefs, and expectations limit that field. If you believe a certain way around something, then you limit your experience with it. For example, I used to watch horror movies just like anybody else, especially when I was younger. And then I got away from it because I didn't like feeding my consciousness that. And I didn't want to put that negativity in there, because I have this thing where when I feed something into my consciousness, I can start seeing it in lots of different places. So I don't typically watch horror movies. But a friend of mine mentioned a movie that happened to be a horror movie, and my judgment kept me from seeing the movie. And then when my friend mentioned the movie, I checked it out. I let my judgment down, and by doing that, there was actually something pretty metaphysical within the movie. It's pretty interesting. And I would have missed that because of my judgment. So our judgment limits how we can live, how we can experience life. It limits the healing that can happen within us, and it limits everything. So to me, all judgments All beliefs, all perceptions are poison. And for me, it is to get rid of all of those things. Anyway, peace out. Namaste.